Humanity had long dreamed of joining the stars, of standing beside the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. That dream had become a reality in the form of the Intergalactic Council, a union of ancient and advanced alien species who ruled vast star systems with a blend of technology, diplomacy, and tradition. Humanity had been granted a seat, but not with open arms. Earth's representatives were seen as inexperienced, reckless, and far too young for the political stage that spanned eons. The day had arrived for humanity's first official meeting at the Intergalactic Council's headquarters on Solaris Prime, a planet bathed in endless twilight and home to the Council's towering halls. In the Grand Council chambers, massive windows showcased the bustling metropolis below, while in the far distance, immense ships traveled through the wormhole lanes of the galaxy. But inside the chamber, humanity's presence was an afterthought. Humanity's delegation had arrived in style, but that style was anything but revered. As their representatives took their seats, their clothes, their tech, and their very demeanor screamed newcomer. The other species, whose civilizations were millennia old, watched with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. At the front of the room, Ambassador Alicia Graves, the leader of the human delegation, stood with her team, each face filled with nervous energy and unspoken resolve. Alicia was an exceptional diplomat, smart and confident, but even she could feel the weight of the room's disapproval. The council president, a tall, elegant Aldrich, a species known for their long-lived intellect and icy demeanor, addressed the gathered delegates. His voice echoed in the chamber, cool and measured. "Today we welcome the representatives of Earth," he said, his gaze never straying to the humans. "As part of your formal induction into the council, we have decided to assign you a trial. A task to prove your worth." Alicia straightened her back, her heart racing. She had heard rumors, but to hear it spoken aloud was something else entirely. "The task," the Aldrich continued, "will be to terraform Gorith 7, a planet long known to be a death world. Your task is simple: make it habitable. A world once considered uninhabitable by every species, and we expect no miracles." A ripple of suppressed laughter passed through the alien delegates, their eyes glinting with amusement. Gorith 7, the planet of storms, predators and poison. A world so hostile to life that no expedition had ever survived longer than a few months. The idea that humans could alter such a world, let alone survive it, was laughable. It was an easy task to assign to the new species, a trial that required no effort on the part of the council and certainly no risk. They fully expected humanity to fail spectacularly. Alicia felt the weight of their eyes on her, waiting for her response. She stood, facing the assembly, her voice unwavering. "We accept," she said. "Give us the resources and time and we will not only survive, we will thrive." A few members of the council exchanged incredulous glances, but none of them voiced their disbelief. Instead, the Aldrich gave a slight nod as if confirming what he already knew. "A year," he said, "we will reconvene after one full cycle of your calendar. If you fail, the task will be reassigned to a more capable species. But we have no doubt you will fail." He gestured to a nearby assistant, who presented a set of detailed projections, maps and data on the planet Gorith 7. "Your task will be to ensure the atmosphere is breathable, the soil fertile and the climate stable. You will need to develop new technologies to withstand the intense conditions. And you will need to do all this without disturbing the native life forms, some of which may be far more dangerous than you imagine." Alicia met his gaze, her eyes cold but determined. "We will succeed." The council session continued, but the human delegation's minds were elsewhere. The deliberations felt more like a distant hum as Alicia and her team discussed their options, their mission and the vast unknowns ahead. As the meeting drew to a close, the Aldrich gave a final, dismissive wave of his hand. "We'll see you in a year," he said. "Keep a seat warm." The human team returned to their quarters aboard their starship, the Erasmus, which was now set to leave the relative safety of the Council's influence and head directly toward the dangerous expanse of Gorith 7. The reality of the task ahead sank in as they prepared for their journey. The crew, scientists, terraformers, engineers, military personnel, and AI specialists, each struggled to keep their nerves steady. The weight of the galaxy's expectations pressed on them like an invisible hand. They had no idea how they were going to achieve the impossible, but they had no choice but to try. Alicia stood at the observation deck, staring out at the stars. "We're going to have to build an entirely new world from nothing," she muttered to herself, more to clear her mind than to seek answers. Her thoughts swirled with the data they had received from the Council. The hostile atmosphere, the deadly storms, the feral fauna. It was enough to make any rational person turn back. But humanity had always been defined by the impossible. Back on Earth, the news of the mission spread like wildfire. The public rallied behind their representatives, many seeing this as humanity's chance to prove itself on the galactic stage. News feeds showed the image of Ambassador Alicia Graves standing in front of the council, her voice resolute as she accepted the trial. However, deep down, Alicia knew this was not just a diplomatic mission. This was a test of humanity's very survival. A failure would not just be an embarrassment, it would solidify the belief that humanity was nothing more than an impulsive, reckless species. And so, the crew of the Erasmus set course for Gorath 7, the death world that no one believed they could tame. "We'll see you in a year," said the ambassador. "Keep a seat warm." The Erasmus dropped out of hyperspace on the outer edge of the Gorath system, its hull shuddering slightly from the gravitational turbulence. The stars beyond stretched and stabilized as the crew stared at the angry, swirling orb on their main view screen. Gorath 7 loomed ahead like a cosmic warning. Thick cloud systems, black, red, and green with toxicity, wrapped the planet in a shroud of storms. Lightning danced across the surface in jagged, unnatural patterns. From orbit, massive landmasses were visible, constantly shifting due to the hyperactive tectonic plates. Sensors picked up spiking radiation levels and signs of frequent, planet-wide electrical surges. The surface was a minefield of volatile energy. Commander Raoul Ishikawa, head of security, let out a low whistle. "I've seen war zones friendlier than this place." Beside him, Dr. Nadia Al-Sayed, lead terraformer, scanned through the initial environmental data. Her eyes flicked across the holograms, absorbing chemical breakdowns and magnetic field anomalies with increasing concern. "This isn't just a hostile planet," she muttered. "It's actively trying to kill anything that gets too close." Alicia stood at the front of the bridge, hands clasped behind her back. The council hadn't exaggerated. If anything, they'd understated the threat. But she didn't flinch. "Then let's give it a reason to stop trying," she said. The first landing site was selected, a relatively stable plateau near the planet's equator, just barely outside a permanent storm system. The team dubbed it Outpost Genesis. Reinforced drop pods containing construction bots, modular habitats, and life support systems began launching in waves. The first 72 hours were a nightmare. The atmosphere's acidity began to corrode landing gear before they could fully deploy. One of the supply pods was struck mid-descent by a bolt of green-tinted lightning, exploding on impact. The soil near the outpost emitted periodic gas burps that poisoned the first set of atmospheric filters. And then came the wildlife. On the second night, motion sensors detected movement just beyond the lights of the outpost. A perimeter drone captured a flickering silhouette, 6 limbs, chitinous plating, a face like a mantis wrapped in flame. It tore through a recon bot in seconds before vanishing into the night. Raoul and his team went on high alert. They doubled the defensive grid, deployed combat drones, and implemented 24-hour surveillance rotations. "This isn't survival," Raoul growled after a week of constant attacks. "It's a siege." Nadia was just as strained. Terraforming protocols weren't designed for planets this unstable. Every attempt to seed the soil with Earth-based microbial colonies failed. The clouds deflected solar radiation erratically, making solar panels nearly useless. Rain came in bursts of acid. Every known terraforming technique had to be rewritten from scratch. She found herself staring at her notes late one night, eyes bloodshot. It was impossible. The council had known. They had planned for this to fail. But then she looked at a small photo stuck to her data pad, a picture of her daughter back on Earth, and she reminded herself of why she came. "This planet doesn't know who it's messing with," she whispered. Progress came slowly and only through brutal adaptation. Instead of trying to replace the atmosphere, Nadia began analyzing native microbes that did survive. She genetically modified them to process the toxic gases into breathable oxygen. Instead of planting Earth crops, she engineered hybrids, half Terran, half Garathian, designed to withstand the acidic soil and rapid temperature shifts. Raoul's team captured one of the native predators, losing 2 drones and nearly a scout in the process. Its tissue was composed of a reactive carbon mesh that insulated against electrical storms. The biomaterial was adapted into a flexible armor that soon became standard issue for the entire crew. Alicia coordinated it all. She was everywhere, on the comms with Earth, in strategic meetings, walking the outer perimeter with the engineers, sleeping no more than 4 hours a night. She kept morale high, rotated schedules, and kept their purpose crystal clear: prove to the galaxy that humanity was not a mistake. 1 month in, the storms lessened slightly over Outpost Genesis. The team had deployed the first atmospheric anchors, titanium towers that disrupted local weather patterns and stabilized pressure zones. For the first time, the skies turned a pale blue above the outpost. It only lasted 3 hours. But it was a win. By month 3, New Terra, as they had begun calling the site, had 3 functioning outposts, a growing greenhouse and partial atmospheric filtration. Losses had slowed. The team had learned to anticipate the planet's rhythms, to read the wind, and to react before disaster struck. A turning point came when a seismic quake hit just south of Outpost Delta. Instead of being crushed, the base shifted on an adaptive platform Nadia's team had built, inspired by native plant structures that bent with tremors instead of breaking. Alicia stood with Nadia and Raoul overlooking the valley, where green mosses now clung to the rocks and artificial rivers flowed with processed, clean water. "We're not just surviving anymore," Nadia said softly, awe in her voice. "We're living." Raoul chuckled, arms crossed. "Don't get sentimental. The planet still wants to eat us." Alicia smiled. "Let it try." In orbit, satellites deployed by the Erasmus broadcast encrypted updates to Earth. The Council, of course, received none of it. That was intentional. Alicia wanted them to believe humanity had gone silent, that they'd failed. Because when they returned to the Council, it wouldn't be with a plea for help. It would be with a world reborn. They called it the Black Bloom. It started as a shimmer in the soil outside Outpost Theta, a silvery fungal growth that spread across the topsoil like wildfire. Within a day, it had devoured the local crops and caused several power relays to short-circuit. Within 2, it was releasing airborne spores that made 3 crew members violently ill. Nadia was furious. It's reactive. Adaptive. It's not just consuming, it's learning what to consume. Her team worked through the night, isolating the spores, sequencing the RNA, and mapping its energy signature. The Black Bloom wasn't just flora, it was something in between plant, fungus, and machine. A native parasite that had lain dormant until their bioengineered plants awakened it. They burned the infected fields. Then sterilized the topsoil. Then burned it again. Another lesson learned the hard way: on Hfy 7, nature wasn't passive, it fought back. By month 4, things were functional, but fragile. Terraforming progress was visible from orbit. The atmosphere had pockets of breathable air. Flora was adapting. Temperatures stabilized in key zones. But progress came with pain. The planet had taken its toll. Lieutenant Mei Ren, a logistics officer, was killed in a storm burst that collapsed the side of a canyon during a supply run. She had volunteered to go after a malfunctioning drone. It was supposed to be routine. They held a memorial under the outpost dome that night. No one spoke much. A simple inscription was added to the wall of the command center. She gave this world a reason to be better. Tensions rose. Raoul's security teams were stretched thin, rotating across 4 outposts that were too far apart and too exposed. Sleep was a luxury. Supplies had to be rationed due to unexpected demand for replacement parts, armor plating, and medical treatments. The biotech hybrid systems were unstable and required constant recalibration. Arguments flared in the command dome one evening when a logistics delay meant Outpost Delta went without functioning water purification for 16 hours. Raoul slammed a data pad onto the table. "I need people rested and alert. We've lost 3 scouts in the last week because we're understaffed and overextended." "We're all understaffed," Nadia snapped. "I'm rewriting the laws of biology with duct tape and solar flare shielding." Alicia stood between them, her voice low but commanding. "Enough. This world's trying to tear us apart. Let's not help it." Silence. She looked at both of them. "If anyone's leaving, they're leaving together. Alive. Or not at all." As the team pushed forward, their breakthroughs became more frequent and bolder. Nadia's lab perfected the symbiotic root system, designed to sync with native fungi without triggering predatory behavior. Crops grew faster. The air became easier to breathe. The black mold never returned. Raoul's team adapted predator chitin into structural armor for habitat shielding. The alien material was stronger and lighter than anything they brought from Earth. Some of the fauna even began avoiding the new buildings, something about the armor's scent. Morale began to climb. They had survived storms, loss, and sabotage by nature itself. The crew grew tighter, more focused. They began calling themselves terraformers, not just colonists or researchers. For the first time, they weren't surviving despite the planet. They were surviving with it. In a rare quiet moment, Alicia wandered the fields of Habitat Nova, watching the wind ripple across rows of green-blue crops. She passed a small open area where a handful of off-duty personnel were setting up a rudimentary grab-ball game. Nadia joined her, holding 2 mugs of synthesized tea. "Doesn't taste like Earth," she said, offering one. "But it's ours." Alicia took a sip, smiling slightly. "I thought this place would kill us in a week." "It tried." Nadia looked out at the horizon. Clouds still rumbled in the distance, but they no longer loomed like omens. "Sometimes I think we're not building a world," she said. "We're negotiating with it. Convincing it to let us stay." Alicia nodded slowly. "Every inch we claim we earn." By month 6, terraformation threshold 1 was officially reached. The Council had set that as the minimum standard for a successful test. Breathable atmosphere in select zones, self-sustaining agriculture and local energy production. They were 6 months ahead of schedule. But the cost was clear. 34 crew had been lost, some to storms, others to creatures they hadn't even had time to classify. 2 outposts had to be relocated after unpredicted seismic shifts cracked the earth beneath them. 1 entire research dome collapsed under atmospheric pressure after a filtration failure. Everyone bore scars. Raoul had a new cybernetic arm after a nest of razor beasts tore through his original one. Nadia walked with a limp after an accidental exposure to a toxic bloom left her hospitalized for weeks. And Alicia, she had begun having the dreams. Nightmares of drowning in acidic storms, of the ground splitting beneath her, of the planet speaking to her in thunder. But she never told anyone. This world had changed them all. Some of that change was terrifying. But some of it was necessary. The crew gathered in Outpost Genesis on day 184. They stood beneath the largest biodome on the planet, now filled with trees, breathable air, and the hum of life. A celebration. A breath. A moment. Alicia took the center, flanked by Raoul and Nadia. "We were never supposed to succeed," she said, voice amplified across the outposts. "This planet was chosen because it was impossible. Because they thought it would break us. But here we are." A cheer rang out. "This world is no longer a death sentence. It's a beginning. And soon, it won't just be ours." In orbit, the Erasmus II launched a new satellite into geostationary position. Its signal reached across the stars. A simple message sent, encoded, and delayed to transmit only on the anniversary of their arrival. Its destination, the Intergalactic Council. Its content, a single line of text. "New Terra is alive. Applications for citizenship now open." The Grand Hall of the Intergalactic Council pulsed with quiet ceremony. Luminescent crystal arches cast ambient light across hundreds of species gathered for the annual convocation. Delegates murmured, robes rustled, translators hummed softly. At the center of it all stood the council president, Valor Threx of the Aldrith, tall and silver-skinned, his expression as still and sharp as a blade. He extended his many-fingered hand, signaling the floor to order. "The 1-year review begins," he intoned. "Let the species of the council report." Around the vast circular amphitheater, delegations stood one by one, sharing progress on trade treaties, peacekeeping missions and resource-sharing pacts. It was ritual, predictable. But beneath the surface, an unspoken curiosity rippled through the chamber. The humans were absent. It had been a year since the Council handed Earth its impossible trial, terraforming Gorith 7, the most inhospitable planet in the charted galaxy. The assignment had been a joke, a politically polite way of saying, "You don't belong here." And now, nothing. No updates. No transmissions. No distress calls. By all accounts, the humans were presumed dead. Delegates from several core species openly speculated about it. The Drell diplomat clicked his mandibles and laughed during a side meeting. Perhaps they realized the stars are for the evolved, not the emotional. The Savari, Serpentine and Ancient hissed a dispassionate theory. They likely succumbed to infighting. Primitive minds under pressure fracture. Only the Varelians, a relatively young species themselves, withheld judgment. Their ambassador, Solari Ven, observed silently, her golden-feathered head tilted in thought. "They said they'd be back in a year," she mused to her assistant. "Perhaps we should wait for the full year." The assistant blinked. "It's been 365 Terran cycles." Solari smiled faintly. "Then give them one more day." Back on Earth, the absence of news from Gorith 7 had created a kind of cultural tension. Media outlets speculated constantly. Was it arrogance to have sent humans to such a place? Had the Council used humanity as a pawn? No signals had returned since the Erasmus II went silent 3 months into the mission. All attempts at long-range communication were swallowed by the gravitational interference around Gorith 7. But not everyone believed they had failed. In underground networks, social media threads, and classified government briefings, the same whispers repeated, "They're not dead. They're just busy." On Solaris Prime, the day of reckoning arrived. Council protocols dictated that if a species failed their trial, their seat would be revoked and offered to another pending race. The vote was procedural. The Aldrich stood once again at the podium, his voice echoing through the hall. "Let the status of Earth's trial be entered into record." He gestured to the silent human platform, cold, empty, and used for 12 months. "By lack of progress report, evidence of survival, or confirmation of life," he began, "I propose the forfeiture of Earth's probationary seat." He paused dramatically, allowing the suggestion to settle into the minds of the delegates. Murmurs of agreement rose across the hall. Then, without warning, every light dimmed. The massive hollow projector in the center of the chamber flickered to life, casting a hologram in full planetary resolution. A world appeared: blue skies, green vegetation, glowing rivers, domed cities, and massive biointegrated towers. Clouds swirled peacefully over stabilized atmosphere. Creatures, once lethal and wild, now moved in controlled harmony across monitored ecosystems. Text overlaid the image in bold galactic standard. "New Terra. Terraformation complete. Immigration now open. All species welcome." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some stood. Some whispered. The Aldrith's jaw visibly clenched. Then came the voice. "Ambassador Alicia Graves, live and clear. Apologies for the late check-in. It's been a busy year." A new feed opened. Alicia standing under a vast, living dome of synthesized glass and organic architecture. Behind her bustled a multicultural settlement. Humans, yes, but also alien visitors in protective suits already adapting to the environment. "We've successfully terraformed Gorith 7, she continued. "Now renamed New Terra." Murmurs turned into stunned silence. Self-sustaining ecosystems. Stabilized tectonics. Controlled weather. Adapted native species. Atmospheric filtration systems based on native biosymbiotes. All completed 6 months ahead of schedule. Solari Ven leaned forward in her seat, smiling openly now. "Well then." Alicia's tone sharpened just slightly. "The Council expected failure. We understand. Our history made you doubt us. But humanity does not yield. When we fall, we rise. When we're told no, we ask why not." She paused, and the image cut to drone footage. Children, human children, playing in a field of bioadapted grass. One waved at the camera. In the background, alien fauna grazed peacefully. "We don't just survive," she said. "We build." The final screen faded in. New Terra immigration portal, citizenship applications now open. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some species cheered. Others shouted. The Drell ambassador fumed, demanding to know why the Council had been left out of the process. The Aldrich pounded the floor, calling for silence. Solari stood slowly, raising a hand. "I move that humanity's probationary status be lifted immediately," she said. "And that New Terra be recognized as an independent, sovereign planetary entity under Earth governance." Shockwaves. More than a dozen species echoed the motion. The Aldrich refused to vote, citing procedural breaches. But it didn't matter. The vote passed. Earth's seat was cemented. Humanity was no longer on trial. They were equal. Afterward, Alicia walked the diplomatic hall on New Terra, a soft breeze moving through the trees outside. Raoul met her at the garden gates. "So, how'd they take it?" She smirked. "Like they saw a ghost. They thought we were dead." She looked out over the city, shimmering towers, natural growth integrated with technology, humans and aliens working side by side. "No," she said. "They hoped we were." The Council was no longer quiet. In the days following humanity's shocking transmission from New Terra, a storm brewed, not from weather patterns but from political upheaval. Council meetings became battlegrounds of ideology, pride, and panic. The old guard, the Aldrich, Drell, and Scifi, scrambled to contain the narrative. They argued it had been a publicity stunt. They demanded verification of terraforming standards, inspections, audits, delays. They cited obscure bylaws, tried to discredit the video, even floated theories that it was AI-generated propaganda. But it was too late. Ships from neutral species had already started en route to New Terra. The Varelians sent an observation team. The Rassel, a trading species of insectoid merchants, began negotiations for port rights. Even the Tai, long isolationist, requested diplomatic passage. 1 week after the broadcast, 36 species had submitted formal applications to open embassies on New Terra. What no one could deny was simple: the humans had done the impossible. And worse for the old council elite, they'd done it without asking for permission. In the heart of New Terra's capital, Horizon's Reach, the city was buzzing with construction and life. Floating transport pods zipped through the air above walkable terraces. Alien engineers walked beside human botanists, inspecting the hybrid vegetation that provided power and purified air. Markets were forming. Music echoed from biodomes. Ambassador Alicia Graves stood at the edge of a newly completed forum tower, overseeing it all with quiet satisfaction. Beside her stood Solari Ven, Varelian diplomat and one of the few who had believed in humanity's potential. "You realize," Solari said, her voice melodious, "you've cracked the council's glass." Alicia glanced over. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "Oh no," Solari chuckled. "Just that once it's cracked, it doesn't hold the same water." There was truth in her words. The council's carefully managed order, its hierarchy of civilization built over eons, was shuddering. Because humanity hadn't just joined the council. They'd leapfrogged it. At a hastily convened emergency session, Council President Valor Threx took the floor. "The humans," he began coldly, "have violated the spirit of intergalactic cooperation. They have created an independent state, unsupervised, unregulated, and entirely outside the bounds of council planning." He turned his gaze to the assembly. "We must consider containment." The chamber erupted in protest. "Containment?" the Varelian representative barked. "You mean sabotage." "We mean stability," Threx snapped. "If every species followed this path, the galaxy would descend into chaos." "The galaxy is already chaos," said another voice. It was Ambassador Graves, standing in the center as the room went silent. She had arrived unannounced, invited technically, but no one expected her to actually appear in person. She wore no ceremonial robe. Just a simple black suit with a silver emblem, the rising sun of New Terra. "You asked us to prove ourselves," she said. "You gave us a death world as a joke. And we turned it into a civilization." Threx's face darkened. "You bypassed protocols. You defied oversight." "We adapted," Alicia said. "You gave us a test. You didn't say how we had to pass." She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You treat this council like a club for the old and powerful. But what about the capable? What about the willing?" She gestured to the chamber. "You call us emotional, impulsive. But look around, half this chamber is applying for a seat on our planet." Some delegates shifted in their chairs. Others avoided her gaze. "We didn't just terraform a world," Alicia said. "We created a model. A shared future. Where fear isn't the gatekeeper." The silence that followed was deafening. Solari rose slowly. "I move that New Terra be recognized as a neutral sovereign world, with diplomatic rights equal to that of any council homeworld." This time the vote wasn't even close. Back on New Terra, the first alien citizens arrived. A Varelian engineer began working with humans on atmospheric resonators. A Rassel trade caravan set up the first off-world commerce node. A small group of Sivari dissidents, exiled for questioning their caste system, were granted asylum. Humans, once treated as a species barely out of their cradle, now found themselves as hosts. As leaders. As pioneers. Raul Ishikawa stood on a balcony overlooking one of the Terra reefs, structures that blended architecture and ecosystem into one. His arm, now fully integrated with New Terra's biotech systems, interfaced directly with the outpost defenses and Terra support network. Nadia joined him, flipping through new reports. 50,000 citizenship applications pending, she said. 38 from council member species. Raul laughed. The aliens want in. They're not just coming for opportunity, she said. They're coming for hope. Raul stared out over the green horizon, once a storm-swept wasteland. Funny, isn't it? He said. They gave us a death sentence. Nadia nodded. And we turned it into an invitation. That night, Alicia broadcast a final message to the galaxy. It wasn't grand. It wasn't angry. It was simple. We came here to survive, we stayed to build. Now we open our doors not because we must but because we choose to. The first interspecies assembly on New Terra was held under the canopy of the Unity Dome, a sweeping structure of glass leaf and biosynthetic steel that arched over the gathering like a living aurora. Light filtered through engineered flora, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor. It was a space designed not just for diplomacy, but for something far rarer in the galaxy. Trust. Representatives from over 40 species filled the chamber. They came not as conquerors or overseers but as guests, some cautiously curious, others openly eager. Many had never set foot on a planet that wasn't under the jurisdiction of the ancient powers. Here, for the first time, they felt the gravitational pull of something different. Possibility. Ambassador Alicia Graves stood at the heart of the assembly, a circle of advisors behind her. Scientists, engineers, civic leaders, and alien collaborators. There were no thrones, no elevated platforms, no hierarchies carved in stone. Just a round table and open dialogue. She began without pomp. New Terra began as a punishment, she said. A mission designed to make us fail. But we didn't fail. We didn't just survive, we invited the future in. She looked at each delegate in turn. Too long have the stars belonged only to the old empires. Too long has the council measured worth by age, not action. We built New Terra to be more than a home. It's a proving ground for what's next. A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Varelians nodded. The Rassel clicked their approval. Even a few Scifi diplomats who had arrived in defiance of their own rigid caste system raised their eyes. Alicia stepped back. Today we propose a coalition, not to replace the council but to expand the galaxy's definition of unity. One based on contribution, not ancestry. Shared knowledge, not hoarded legacy. Equal voice, not predetermined rank. The proposal appeared in the air as a shimmering construct. A framework for governance, exploration, defense, and scientific exchange, open to all species willing to participate on merit. The name at the top read, The New Concord. Back on Solaris Prime, the council fumed. President Threx paced in a silent fury as reports came in. Species are defecting, his assistant reported. 5 core members have opened full diplomatic channels with New Terra. More to follow. They've shattered precedent, Threx growled. This Concord will erode everything we've built. No, said Solari Ven, who had remained behind to speak with him privately. They haven't shattered anything. They've simply built what you wouldn't. She stood calm, wings folded, her gaze steady. You gave them a death world. They turned it into the galaxy's first hope in centuries. On New Terra, progress moved fast. Terraforming techniques developed on the death world were now being shared freely. Human and alien researchers worked side by side in the Nova Institute, designing joint missions to explore unclaimed regions of the galaxy. A treaty was signed to protect emerging civilizations, offering assistance rather than annexation. Trade bloomed. Culture cross-pollinated. Even art and music from dozens of worlds filled the streets of Horizon's Reach, blending into a vibrant tapestry of languages and light. The first child born on New Terra with mixed human and alien parentage was celebrated across the stars. Alicia, older now, walked through the gardens at the city's heart. She moved with quiet grace, her diplomatic uniform exchanged for civilian garb. The air here was cleaner than Earth had known in centuries. The sky above was New Terra's, stubborn, stormy, beautiful. Raoul joined her, cybernetic arm humming softly as he handed her a cup of steaming synth tea. Council ever respond to the Concord Charter? He asked. She smirked. They sent a strongly worded statement about reckless independence and civilizational overreach. So, progress. She chuckled. How long before they come around? They already are. Quietly. They'll never admit it, but some of their own species are here already. Planting seeds. Raoul looked up at the skyline, towers alive with energy, glowing with natural bioluminescence. You know, he said, this world used to try and kill us every day. Alicia nodded. Now it asks what else we can build. Later that evening she sat alone watching a live feed from orbit, shuttles coming and going, species arriving in peace. She thought of those first months, of the death, the storms, the silence. Of May. Of the crew who didn't make it. And of the voice inside her that never stopped whispering. You can't fail now, not just for Earth but for everyone watching. A message pinged at her terminal. From an Aldrich Jr. diplomat. Requesting official visit to New Terra. On behalf of the President. Informal. She smiled. The future had already begun. The final scene unfolded not on a planet, but in the deep void. A new ship, Unity's Edge, prepared to launch from New Terra's orbital station. It was the first joint vessel built by humans and 5 other species, crewed by a blended team of diplomats, scientists, engineers, and explorers. Its mission, deep galaxy expansion and aid to civilizations not yet discovered. As the countdown began, a human child and a Varelian elder stood in the observation bay, watching the engines flare to life. The child looked up. Do you think they'll find anyone out there? The elders smiled, voice warm and distant. They'll find someone. And this time they'll know we come with open hands. The engines roared. The stars welcomed them.